Critiquing your work is all about finding out what you think went well, what you think could have gone better, what you can change next time. In other words, critiquing is done after the fact. It's done with hindsight. Whilst I think that critiquing is one of the most important things to improve in your photography, and I do want to make videos in the future about how to positively critique your work, so subscribe to the channel and ring the bell if you're interested in that. Today I want to talk about a technique that is done as you're taking the photo. This isn't about upgrading your equipment or traveling to newer, cooler places. It's actually about changing your mindset and how you think about approaching an image. We're going to take a step beyond just taking pictures of something we see and move towards creating images of what we see and what we feel and what we want other people to experience. Don't think that this is just about technical cameras and expensive lenses. If anything, it's more applicable to less expensive equipment. The reason that people don't think their phone will take good pictures is because 99% of phone pictures are just snapshots, without any thought for composition or lighting or telling a story. And I'm going to take some photos later on in the video with my phone just to show this. But back to this technique. I'm going to call it SWYL, or say what I like, or say what you like, because the idea is that you focus in on one element within a scene. You say what you like beyond just the subject, and then you use that element to give you direction in the outcome of your image. But if you don't already know how to critique your images, how can I be expecting you to be able to pull apart a scene you're looking at and find intricate elements to focus on? Well, I can't, and I'm not. People often talk about having a creative eye in photography. It's a natural creative flair and understanding for composition and for colour. And all we're doing here is taking a moment to ask, what is our creative eye really telling us? The more advanced you get, the easier you'll find it to find intricate details of the scene to focus on. For example, I can look at this initial photo that I took of a caterpillar and I can tell that I liked the complementary colours of the pink in the background and the green of the subject. And I wanted that to be emphasised. So by using a shallower depth of field, the outer focus area would expand, and then I could focus stack to make sure the subject was in focus, but I got a larger area of pink in the background. You may not be at that stage technically, but that doesn't matter. Whatever stage you are at in your photography, by taking direction from what you really like within a frame, you will see an improvement in your photos. But for now, we're going to start simple with 5 basic elements that you may be able to find within your scene to focus on. After I've finished here today with this kingfisher and anything else that might come by, I'm going to head back to the computer and talk you through 5 of my old images which were taken to exploit a specific element within the scene. After we've talked about what those basic elements are, I'm going to go out on a shoot which is rife with opportunities for simple snapshots, a midday walk out on the moors. But I'm going to implement these SWYL elements to elevate those pictures from their snapshotty beginnings and up to more creative, interesting photos. This is really about the why of photography, rather than the how. And we all love learning the hows of photography. You know, how to use leading lines to compose, how to photograph the stars, and how to shoot long exposures. We like them because they show real tangible results. You try something new, you get a new result. It's what makes us love photography, especially towards the beginning of the learning curve. And in comparison, this technique, this idea may seem a bit boring. But without developing our sense of why we're taking an image, we won't be able to correctly identify how to take the image, which techniques to use. I want to move through this quite quickly so that we can get back outside with the camera. So as I said, I'm going to talk you through some of my older images which were taken to exploit a specific element within the frame. The 5 simple elements that we're going to be looking at are lighting on the subject, elements of the background, patterns or structure, movement in the scene or in the subject, and finally, context. You may think, well, all of these things are important. You can't ignore lighting on the subject just because you like something in the background. And that's true. I'm not saying forget everything and only focus on the one element. I'm just saying allow the one element that you really like to give you direction in how you take the picture. This first example shows this really well. So I took a second to look at the images I was getting of this grebe, and I could see this streak of light through the water. I liked this bold streak of colour. For me, it was important to give that streak room to go through the frame. I didn't want to cut it off with an edge. And so I placed the grebe at the top of the frame, and nothing but dark softness below for that streak to cut through. So throughout these frames, I'm not ignoring everything and only focusing on the streak of light. I'm still trying to create a balanced composition, and I'm still trying to have the subject look at the camera and have the lighting coming in from the side. But the SWYL element is giving me direction. I'm staying conscious of that streak of light. And the result is this lovely, minimal, low-key image. So the SWYL element here was a direct result of lighting on the subject. With this next image, the thing I was focused on was the rich, warm colours in the clean background. The teal here was sticking to the plants around the edge of the lake. And so I knew that I was waiting both for it to clear the foliage and for the reeds in the background to be in full sun. Now I'm still taking images the whole time. I'm not only waiting for that one thing, I'm going to keep firing off frames. But I know that when those things coincide, a clean frame with the full sun on the background, I'm going to have the image that I really like. And if that never happens, I've still got all the images that I shot around it, which will work really nicely. So the SWYL element that I was paying attention to here was the background, making sure that it was clean and colourful. Taking a look at these two images this time, taken whilst I was in Costa Rica, the focus here was pattern. Everything else became secondary to showing the patterns that the snakes' bodies were creating. Seeing the shapes that they were making told me to shoot from directly above. And then the next most important thing was the depth of field. In one image it was to get everything important in focus, in the other image it was to create some depth. But the element that was giving me direction on how to take the picture was the pattern, telling me to shoot from above. Whilst I was in Costa Rica, I spent days waiting for a hummingbird image, and my first success was this image. I was super happy with it, I still am, but it was lacking some creativity. It was a case of doing everything correctly and getting a nice image, but something was missing. The fascinating thing about hummingbirds is their speed and their ability to hover, and I wanted to show this motion in the frame. And so I took this picture. After some experimenting, slowing down the shutter speed to 1/250th of a second meant that I could get the head of the hummingbird tack sharp, but the wings were still blurred in motion, and as could always be counted on in the cloud forests, it would start raining. And that would add yet another element of motion to the scene. And so the SWYL element that led to this image was obviously motion in both the subject and in the scene. The final basic element we were going to talk about was context. There were plenty of ways to photograph these guillemots. Getting closer would have been an obvious choice. I could have moved around the headland and shot down on them. But for me, the interesting part of the scene was everything together. It's the shapes and the patterns of the rocks, the camouflage nature of the wildlife within the rocks, the fact that they're on a very tall cliff which overhangs the waves below, and the geology as well, the colours and the shades that go throughout the rocks. All of this together creates a lot of context for the scene, and I think it makes a really strong image. So those were 5 really basic elements that you could be looking for within a scene. And if you can identify just one of these elements within a scene, then it will give you direction as to why you're taking a picture, and therefore how to take it. And so now it's time to head out on the moors and put all of this into action. When you're walking out on the moors, you find a lot of these solitary trees which make fantastic subjects. But what I particularly like about this scene that I found today is that as the rain rolls in over the hills, you get a lot of separation between both the subject and the initial peak in the background, and then there's a hill slightly further than that one, there's another peak on the left, there's sort of a valley between them, and all these contours are at different levels of separation. So what I've done is I've flipped the tripod to get nice and low, because the obvious thing to do when you see something nice is you're at standing height and you take a picture. But then the peaks and the hills in the background and the tree canopy are all going to be at the same level. They're getting quite messy up in the top third. So what I can do by dropping down low, I can put the tree above the hills in the background, and I can blur the foreground, so that takes a lot of distraction out of the picture. And then by using a shallow depth of field, I'm at f4, and a fairly fast shutter speed, because as you can tell it's very windy today, I can continue to take pictures for the next 10 or 15 minutes, and the background is constantly going to change as the amount of rain in the background changes. And so my initial thought was, I like this tree, let's take a picture of it. The further thought was, what do I like specifically about this? I'm surrounded by lone trees, why is this one standing out? And the realisation was that it's because of this separation with the background, and that you can see more landscape with these other trees. If I shot this one to my right, you've got 2 or 3 other trees in front of it. The same with the ones on my left. You've got a load of sheep over there. This one is completely alone, and the hill drops off on the back side of it, so it goes straight through to the background. There's no distraction there. And then it was a simple decision for the composition to try and provide so the wind's picking up, and then finally it was a compositional decision to put the tree up high and have all the peaks and the contours of the valley and the hills below the tree. And then we've got this final picture. I've decided to come down off the top of the moors now into a valley, into a woodland, to get some shelter from the rain. But as I've come over the top and I've started walking down into the valley, trees jumped out of me, because it's got these twisty white branches which contrast quite heavily with the sort of deep reddy brown twigs that are coming off of them. And so that's what I want to capture. So I've gone portrait and I'm shooting at f2.8 to get rid of any background, although the only bits of background you can see are through the small gaps in the tree anyway. And then I need a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the motion, because it's quite windy today. And because these branches pop so much from the surrounding twigs, it's going to be really easy to just do some simple contrast adjustments in post and really make the image pop. The reason I'm taking this is because of the patterns that the branches are making, and so that is all that matters in this frame. Get rid of everything else and shoot those to be as tack sharp as possible. As I said I would earlier, I put the camera away and I'm going to replace it with my phone. Because this isn't about the type of camera that you're using, it's about the mindset you're in and applying a bit more thought into the photo. So what I've found here is a really large tree that's fallen down in the last couple of storms that we've had. And what's cool about that is it's taken everything that's usually up in the canopy and it's brought it down to our level. And what I'm specifically looking at here is the ivy that's wrapped its way up this tree, and specifically these pods at the end, which will be picked up by birds usually and carried around the woodland and help the plant to spread. And what I think is cool about these is how they stick out beyond the leaves. They want to be obvious to the birds that are going to be trying to find them. So when I photograph them now, that's what I'm going to try and focus on. I'm going to try and focus on how much they protrude from the leaf foliage behind them. And so what I'm looking for is one of these pods which is surrounded in the background by its leaves, rather than a far away background or sticks like this. I want it to be surrounded by green leaves. And I think I found one in this one. So I'm going to open up the camera and I'm going to go into portrait mode. Now most phones in the past 2 or 3 years have come with a portrait mode, and what it will do is it senses the depth within the frame, and it allows you to create a shallow depth of field through processing rather than using expensive lenses and a nice camera. So I'm going to place the pods right in the middle, get as close as I can, focus on the one at the front, take a picture. So I've come up the hill a little bit away from the river just to help the audio out, but we're not quite done with the phone photo yet. Just because we took it on the phone doesn't mean it doesn't need processing. All images need some level of processing to make them look their best. So we're going to jump back into the camera app, and the great thing about using a phone is that you don't need a computer, you don't need Lightroom or Photoshop to edit. Your camera app will have an editor built in. So we're going to start by opening up the adjustments and cropping. I'm going to choose to get rid of the background here. There we go. And try and get the seed pods as close to the center as I can, where it feels nice and balanced. There we go. And then I'm going to move on to color and exposure. We're going to bring the highlights down slightly because the leaves were quite reflective, so they're getting a bit bright. So we're going to bring them down, and then we're going to go to the overall brightness and bring that up. I tend to find that most phones do underexpose, and I like bright, colourful images. So I'm going to bring the brightness up, and then I'm going to bring the contrast in. But I'm actually going to go over to use the black point and the white point to do the contrast. We're going to bring the black point down, and the white point up. Great, and then on to colour. You notice how the highlights are slightly blue. We're going to warm up the entire scene to make those highlights closer to white. Then I'm going to go over to tint, and it's my personal style that I like a bit of magenta in the picture. Finally, there's not many blues other than in those highlights, so I'm going to bring the blue tones down and then the overall saturation up slightly. And there we go, I'm happy with that. A nice macro-esque picture taken on the phone without any extra equipment, and the reason that the picture came out nice was because I put a little bit of extra time and effort into thinking about the composition, why I wanted it to look a certain way, and I found something to focus on, and that was making it pop from the background. Okay, and so that's the end of this video. But I am thinking about extending this idea into maybe a 10-minute video for each of the simple elements to give a bit of a further explanation and a look at which techniques we might be able to use. If that sounds like it might be interesting to you, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I hope that this video was interesting and informative, and if it was, you can hit the like and subscribe buttons below. It helps me out a lot, and it only takes a second. Okay, great. I will catch you next time.